So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Edward Yelin. He has been researching the relationship between work and health for more than 4 decades. His research has focused on how persons with health problems can maintain employment and conversely, how changes in the nature of work affect the health of the working age population. He's the director of the California Labor Lab, Nash Center of Excellence for Total Worker Health, and principal investigator of the California Work and Health Survey, one of the lab's research projects. Dr. Yellen received his PhD from the Department of City and Regional Planning at UC Berkeley and has been on the faculty of the Department of Medicine and Philip R. Lee Institute for Health Policy Studies since 1980. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Deborah, that's going to be a hard act to follow because I have a lot of numbers and you said it better in text, as is usually the case. But I am going to talk about employment in the arts in California, scope and challenges. Disclaimer has already been read, and so what I'm going to do today is to talk about employment in the arts in California. So I'm going to show the extent of arts-related employment. Some of the numbers are similar to what Deborah presented earlier. Characterize that employment by demographics, geography, how people are hired to do this work, which is perhaps the special contribution of our center, looking at traditional versus alternative modes, whether it's in main or second jobs. And then we'll deal a little bit with the every waiter is an actor in waiting. Is that a myth? Or are we able to validate some of the information about that? And finally, we'll describe the economic status of those in arts-related employment. The data from my talk are from the California Work and Health Survey. It was a random sample of about 4,000 working-age Californians. Since I'm a little over 70, we decided to include people at least till 70. And they were solicited through cell phone listings, which turns out to be a great way of getting people, some of whom are hard to reach because there's 98% coverage of the adult population. The unique features of the survey were comprehensive coverage of both employment and health. There are a lot of surveys which cover one or the other, but not both in equal amounts. And we covered both main and second jobs and employment over an entire month. Much arts-related employment is missed by asking only about main jobs, and it's also missed because in traditional labor market surveys, they ask only about the week prior to the interview. So here I'm going to present some of the data, and let's go to the third bar from the top, because that gives the full extent of employment. And it includes people who are either in an arts-related occupation or industry. And it constitutes 6% of California's labor market for people in the age range we covered, and 1.1 million individuals. And if you look at the next number down, it's people who reported both in arts-related occupation and industry. For instance, they reported that they were a ballet dancer and the industry was an arts group. That core is 250,000. There's a zero missing on that number I now see. So between the 1.3% who have both an arts-related occupation industry and the 6% or 1.1 million who are either an arts-related occupation or industry lies some truth. There were 3.9%, or roughly 650,000, who reported any arts-related occupation in main or second jobs, 3.4% in any arts-related industry. And then there are people who reported an arts-related occupation but did not report an arts-related industry. That's about 2.5% of the California labor force. And an example of that would be somebody who's hired as a graphic artist in a non-arts related business. And conversely, there were people who were in arts-related industries but didn't report an arts-related occupation. Example of that would be an accountant in a film studio. So the most common occupation industries and arts-related employment. For main jobs, the most common occupations are writers and authors, producers, directors, and actors, about 35,000 each. And remember, Jolie said she had 160,000 members. We only ask about the month prior to the interview. So some of those people may have worked, more than a month ago, but less than a year ago, so we didn't capture them very well. The most common industries were not what you'd think. They were in film studios or stuff like that. It was amusement parks and arcades. People who were independent artists, writers, and performers, about 85,000, and people who worked in spectator sports in one way or another. For second job, the most common occupations, again, writers and authors, and photographers and producers, directors, about 35,000 each. The most common industries are independent artists, writers, and performers, people, contract workers, amusement parks and arcades, and spectator sports. There's a similar age distribution of those employed in either arts-related occupations or industries versus the remainder of the economy. On the left, arts, on the right, are the people on the rest of the economy, and that'll be true for the next few slides. It's a similar gender distribution of those employed in either arts-related occupations or industries versus the remainder of the economy, with slightly more men than women employed. But when it comes to race and ethnicity, non-Hispanic whites have a much larger fraction of arts-related employment versus the remainder of the economy. Something like 55% of arts-related employment are people who identified as non-Hispanic whites. And Hispanics, as opposed to the other groups, are significantly underrepresented in this industry. Arts-related employment have a higher proportion of those with at least a college degree versus the remainder of the economy. You can see that something in excess of half of people in the arts have at least a BA, and about a quarter have been to graduate school. And for, pardon me, for the rest of the economy, the fraction with a high school or less, or just some college, is much greater. One of the myths is that arts-related employment is just in a couple areas of the state, and it's concentrated in Los Angeles and the Bay Area, but it's represented well throughout the remainder of the state. So if you look on the left of the two charts, you can see that there are significant numbers of people in arts-related employment in Orange County, Inland Empire, San Diego, Central Sacramento area, and even the Central Coast. So it is more concentrated in LA and the Bay Area, but it's well represented throughout the state of California. The majority of those who are employed in arts-related occupations hold 2 or more jobs, and that's twice the rate of those in the remainder of the economy. So 53% of people with arts-related employment hold 2 or more jobs, and it's only 20% for the rest of workers. For those who had more than one job, the majority of the arts-related occupations are in a second job. So 56% said it was a second job only, and another 25% said it was both in their main and second jobs. So when people work in the arts, it's often a side gig, and just in terms of the money earned and also the hours spent doing it. When you look at using standard labor market ways of looking at how people work throughout the year, whether full-time or part-time, and full year or part year, about half work full-time full year, and about a quarter work part-time at either for part of a year or full year. So overall, full-time workers are 74% of those who work in arts-related employment, and full-year workers, on the other hand, are only 56%. So work in the arts is definitely episodic. So here I'm looking at the occupations of those who reported arts-related industry in their main job. And you can see that only about a third of those with an arts-related industry in their main job report an arts-related occupation. And the rest of it reflects pretty much what people do in jobs in general in California. The flip side is also true. These are the industries of those who told us they had an arts-related occupation in their main job. Only a quarter of them had reported an industry, reported that they were in an arts-related industry. Interestingly, almost as many were in informational fields and professional tech and scientific services. So there are people, for instance, who work in game companies and things like that, or information, computer-related fields. So they do also reflect the mix of industries around the state of California. So the day jobs, the occupations and the main jobs of those who have a second job in arts-related work, again, they reflect pretty much the full run of employment in the state of California. About a quarter are in management occupations, 15% are in education or libraries, 13% are might be good candidates for the movie Office Space. They work in offices. And you see the rest reflecting pretty much what people do in the state of California. For the second shift, these are the occupations and second jobs of those with a first job in arts-related employment. And I added the question here, where are the baristas? So there are a small number in that top category, production occupations, because some of them get coded as working in food production. But 12% take their second shift in food preparation occupations. So there's some truth to the fact that they are in making coffee and serving food in Los Angeles and the Bay Area where the jobs are. But how are they hired to do work? It's not the traditional labor market. In this chart, we show the percent of those in arts-related employment working as independent contractors in all main and second jobs. Overall, half of those with arts-related employment are independent contractors. For their main jobs, about 4 in 10 are. And for those in second jobs, almost 2/3 of them are hired as independent contractors. So they're not formally hired by the firm for whom the work is done. We also asked about working conditions in arts-related occupations. 13% told us that their work was contracted out, that they were working for somebody who contracted their work to somebody else. 2% worked as a temp agency. 6% were on-call workers. Only 20%, despite Jolie's figures, said that they were union members. In terms of size of firm, 22% worked in large firms and 62% worked in fairly small firms. Almost half reported bullying from supervisors, co-workers, or customers in their job. 63% only said their employer would offer health insurance to their workers, and only 48% were included in any pension retirement plan or tax-deferred savings plan. So we also looked at people who got their jobs through an app. For all those in arts-related employment, as well as those who were in main and second jobs in that field, about slightly less than 9% got their jobs through an app. Now I'm going to turn to the economic returns or lack of it for those who are in arts-related employment. We look at household incomes of less than 125% of the federal poverty rate, or with personal injury in earnings of $40,000 and less. For those in any arts-related occupation, 10% met our study definition of poverty, and 42% had less than $40,000 in earnings. I won't go over the figures in the bottom bars because they're similar. The point is there are a lot of people who are below the poverty line or earning low earnings. For those in arts, who have one arts-related job, the numbers were considerably smaller, which indicates this is kind of like in social science we call selection bias. If you can make it in one job, you're less likely to be in poverty. So overall, 3% of those were in poverty, but still almost 4 in 10 had earnings of less than $40,000 a year. For those with, we looked at the poverty rate of those with an arts-related job and one or more other jobs. So people take the second job because they're not making it, and as a result, 27% of them are still below our definition of poverty, and 46% have low household earnings of low personal earnings, almost half, and that's quite startling to say the least. We also asked about some measures of financial strain. We asked about them if they could sustain a $400 emergency expense or expect actual financial hardships in the next 2 months in food, housing, or medical care security. 22% of the people in any arts-related occupation told us they couldn't incur a $400 emergency expense, and just under 1 in 5 said that they expect actual hardships in food, housing, or medical care in the next 2 months. They are not immune from food stamp benefit recipiency or food bank usage. 14% about of were SNAP food stamp beneficiaries, and about 14% were users of a food bank in the year prior to interview. So that gives you some sense of dire need among a large fraction of the people in arts-related employment. So I'm going to turn now to actors because I know there's a lot of interest in some of the myths and reality of what it's like to work as an actor in Hollywood these days. And here you see the quite startling data that 26% of actors have incomes below the poverty line in their families and have personal earnings of less than $41,000 a year. And of course, it's not the case that those in other occupations in the economy are immune from these phenomenon. The point is, though, that actors are not themselves immune from them. So here, though, percent of actors in those other occupations in one-person households with household income below the poverty line or with earnings less than $40,000 a year. And again, this is what social scientists call selection bias. 0% of actors who live in one-person households don't earn enough to get out of poverty. And it could be that people who stay in acting ultimately get out of poverty, but still 18% of them don't earn $40,000 or more. And again, with these groups, 10% of actors are SNAP beneficiaries and 10% make use of a food bank. So to summarize, 6%, about 1.1 million Californians are in arts-related employment, and 1.3%, about 250,000, are in arts-related occupations and industry, what I referred to earlier as the core. The LA and the Bay Area dominate, but there's some jobs throughout the state. The majority hold 2 or more jobs. For most, only the second job is in the arts. The vast majority of those in arts-related occupations are not in arts-related industries, and in arts-related industries are not in arts-related occupations. The majority work as independent contractors. Many more are on-call temp agency or subcontracted workers. At least 1 in 10 in arts-related employment are in households with income at or below 125% of the federal poverty level, and between 30 to 40%, 5% have personal earnings of less than $40,000 a year. A high proportion experience financial strain, and many are SNAP beneficiaries and users of food banks. All of the above is true for actors, with the exception that actors in one-person households aren't in poverty, and it may be that the more successful ones are able to continue to live alone. Caveats. The data reported here are raw counts and don't take into account multipliers, some of the things that Deborah was referring to earlier. So the true impact of economy of the California may be greater. In our counting, we counted the food truck inside the Paramount gates, but not the food truck outside. So the wall may be an arbitrary divider. We don't count all the lawyers, accountants, investment firms, and public relations professionals unless they were hired directly by an arts-related industry. All baristas may still be artists or actors in waiting. Unless they report an arts-related occupation and industry in the month prior to interview, we don't count them. The rest may have given up. The myth is dead, but the myth can live on because the waiters may want to be actors. So, conclusions, we only measure direct employment, but it's substantial. We still haven't figured out a way to make working in the arts pay reliably so that many remain with low earnings. Those in arts-related employment are prey to the same forces as the rest of the labor market and may have experienced them first. Large proportions work as independent contractors or only as long as a project lasts. I'd like to acknowledge the California Work and Health Survey team, Tricia Eiley, Alicia LaFrance, Ima Varghese Mack, Davis Research, Nari Ree, and Laura Trupin, who retired last year. Thank you.